first of all, I want to thank Earl Schultz for coming and talking to us about something that has been in his life for almost ever, right? And I think it'll be a wonderful history lesson for, I'm not originally from Janesville, so I love these kinds of programs, learning about my newer community. We've been here about 25 years, so it's not like I'm brand new. I can get around Janesville fairly well now, you know. So I'm going to let him do any other introductions because I know he has a whole story to tell and it's no good for me to tell it. So we're going to leave it to Earl.
Thank you. Henry David Thoreau many years ago said that ice was a fit subject for contemplation. Now I'm not sure what he meant by it, but it's a great day to talk about ice in Wisconsin, Janesville, Wisconsin. And what I'm going to talk about a little bit is a little bit about my story, but everybody in this room has their own story. And I always tell people, like, you remember the river runs through with Robert Redford? Well, the ice house ran through my life. And so this is some of the things I'll talk about. A little bit about, as far as my history personally, I was born in Watertown in 1941 with ice in my mouth. My dad was an iceman, started in 1939. And then from Watertown, he moved up to Portage, and then we bought City Ice Company in 1954 and moved to Janesville. And then when I was in high school, I had Mr. Frank Douglas for a history teacher, one of the most outstanding teachers you could ever have. And I thought, he was telling me about all these travels he did during the summer, and I thought, whoa, this is what I want to do. I want to go to college and become a history teacher so I can have my summers off and travel. Well, I went to college, but I changed and got a business degree at Milton College. So I didn't have the opportunity to travel during the summer. And then after Milton College, I went to grad school at UW-Madison, the School of Business, and then served 6 years in the United States Army Reserves. But later on, I did get to travel with my wife throughout the whole world. And when I went different places, I would take an ice bag and hold it up at iconic sites throughout the world. So like I came back home, I could tell people that we were now City Ice Company International. And also, I could spread the gospel of ice from the pyramids of Egypt to the Great Wall of China. But my audience was only audience of one, which was my wife, who was in a hotel room at night. But then I embellished my resume a little bit down the road, because people like titles. So I gave myself Doctor of Iceology title in 1977 from the University of Iceland. And then I became an adjunct professor of ice. But now I'm on sabbatical. Then I tell people I'm on sabbatical leave, and I'm doing ice research back here in Janesville. So that's a little bit of my past history. So let me begin with some interesting notes about Icemen. Believe it or not, books have been written, hit songs such as "How'd you like to be the Iceman? Any ice today, lady? Let's go court in my ice truck. Meet me by the ice house, Lizzie." Well, and then also somebody may have heard the famous play by Eugene O'Neill, "The Iceman Cometh." There are also many books written about the ice industry. American Ice Harvest, the frozen water trade, the ice crop, many, many. And they're very interesting reading for me, probably not so much for you, but I found it fascinating. Another interesting note, there are a number of icemen who became U.S. presidents, such as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, and they supervise the ice harvests on their own plantations. Also, I like James K. Polk because he's the first president to put icebox in the White House. So I thought that was significant. And then you got Grant, General Grant, President Grant. He always had trouble making money. And in the early 50s, before he became a great general, he tried to make some extra money, and he contracted with his partner. They were moving 100 tons of ice down the Columbia River to San Francisco, and they were going to sell it for a huge profit. Unfortunately, somebody beat them to the punch, and they brought in ice from Alaska, and so all their ice melted in the harbor. So, now he might have been a great general, but he was a poor businessman and a poor iceman. And Dwight Eisenhower worked in an ice house, and 12 hours a day for 10 cents an hour, moving 300 pounds blocks of ice. A little bit different for Ronald Reagan. His connection to the ice industry, when he was only 3 years old, his brother, they lived across from the depot, and he had to cross the park, but there's an ice wagon at the depot, and it was back when it's steamy hot, and there were no popsicles and stuff, so the ice wagon, when you get chips and suck on, tasted pretty good. So his brother got him to come with him, and they were going over to the depot to the ice wagon, but there's a freight train that was in the yard, and they had to crawl into the freight train to get to the ice wagon. Well, then the train started moving, so they just got through before the wheels would have crushed Ronald Reagan. There would be no Ronald Reagan presidency. So I thought that was interesting too. And then when Paul Ryan and his family came down the ice house to see some of my artifacts, I should have told him that maybe if he'd instead of his friend working for me at the ice house, that he should have worked there. Maybe the pathway to the White House was through the ice house. So, and another unknown fact is a lot of high school, college, and professional football players worked at the ice house because they never had weight rooms back in the old days. And so when they put a block of ice on and run up 2 or 3 flights of stairs, it would build up to your legs. And some famous people is Red Grange. His ice songs are in the Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. And Joe Louis was an iceman in Detroit. Lug blocks around for 10 cents an hour. So, what was the story behind such an influence of ice on the American economy that resulted in so many books, songs, plays, and jobs? Where did the use of ice begin? Why did the Iceman become an American icon? Let's look at the brief history of the ice industry first, followed by some personal story at City Ice Company. Well, we know the Romans and some of the aristocrats had ice and snow brought down from the mountains to cool their drinks. And Alexander the Great got a massive amount of snow to cool off the wine kegs before the troops went into battle. But then you fast forward to the American colonies, and they had small ice houses on their plantations, but it was mostly for their own use because most of the food was preserved by dehydration, smoking, or pickling, and there wasn't the preservation that they had later on with the use of ice. However, in 1806, a young man about 23 years old, son of a lawyer, dad wanted him to go to Harvard, and he had this capitalistic streak. He wanted to get into business, and make a fortune. So his idea, he's going to go to his dad and to the bankers and talk about it. He's going to tell them that he's going to cut ice, a block of ice, put it on a wagon, take it to the dock, put it on a ship, and go 3 weeks down to Cuba, where they've never heard of ice, sell it and make money. Now, what do you think his dad and the bankers said to him? You're nuts. There's no way you're going to make any money. However, he did dream. He had major setbacks. The first shipment in 1806 was to Martinique, and he lost $4,500. Didn't deter him. In 1812, even when the British and Americans were fighting, he did ship more to Cuba, lost more money. But each time, he invented better insulation, better tools, and then 10 years after the 1812, when he lost money down in Cuba, he was successful and started making money. And then he got together with Nathaniel Wyatt, and they invented the ice plow and other horse-drawn tools that made it a lot easier to harvest the ice, because originally all he had was a ice axe and a saw, and it was very labor-intensive. So then in 1833, he shipped 180 tons out of Boston all the way to Calcutta, India. 4 months through over the equator, and he got there, and he still managed to make a profit. And then from then on, he was really successful. And the demand for ice grew, not only just for preservations, but if the ice box came in, they needed more ice for that. And then the railroads for shipping produce from California, meat packers, the beer companies, so the demand increased. So he became very wealthy, but also the demand for ice, and then it spread to the Midwest and to the upper Midwest, and then there were ice houses all over the communities. In fact, let's see, I want to get this right. In 1879 and 1880, 4 miles on the Kennebec River, there were 4,000 men, 350 horses working day and night cutting ice from the river. 1 million tons of ice was harvested and put in the warehouses. 8 to 10 million tons of ice were sold and used during that period of time. And right after the Civil War, there was 3 million tons of ice harvested in the Hudson Valley region. And the ice houses were huge. They go up to 90,000 tons of ice. Some were 400 feet long, 300 feet wide, multiple stories. And the wages, of course, they weren't much. $1 a day, 10 cents an hour. But without the growth of the ice industry, the other industries in America would have never grown. So it was an economic necessity for them to have the ice business. But eventually, the ice harvesting declined for sanitation reasons and the fact that manufacturing became more economical. But they still cut ice as late as 1962 up in Milton on Clear Lake. Now a little bit about the ice harvesting process. That's where the Frigid farmers come in. Because the first thing you have to do is measure the thickness of the ice. Once that is done, if it's safe for the person to get out onto the ice with the horses, they have to scrape the snow off. And once the snow is scraped off, depending on whether or not they need to clear the impurities off the top of the ice, if they've had snow or slush ice, they might take a planer over the top and skim it all off so it gets down to the clearer stuff. If not, then they start marking the field. They put a point, straight line out one way and a straight line the other way. And then there's a marker that goes along that line with a guide on it, and they start marking the field this way and that way. And they get it all done. It looks like a checkerboard when they're done. And then the plow, the horse-drawn plow comes along and goes into the grooves and cuts it through. Not all the way through, because it would fill back up, but enough that you can still have the horses out there. And then they take the saws and cut off a big area, and then they float them up to a channel, what you'll see in the video, near the ice house, to take it up in the endless chain into the ice house. I'm sure a lot of people fell in, horses fell in. So then after the ice harvesting is basically done, manufacturing plants started up in that. And that was with the can method, where they call it, you made 300 pounds of block and floor, and then you hoisted them out with cranes, and then you cut the ice cubes. There was no ice cubes before they had manufactured ice. They used saws to cut them into small cubes. They could break up the big blocks of ice, but that was it. And then nowadays, the ice companies, they have big industrial machines that sit up high. They're dropped into a bin, augered out, bagged, palletized, everything with one person in the ice place. And of course, the ice is all treated. So, what about City Ice Company? It started in 1858, down on Main Street. Still got the building, still there. Selling one product, ice, all these years, different forms later on. Once in a while, they went into coal and wood, even grass pop at one time, but ice was always the main staple. Ice would, in the 1890s, ice was, was 16 inches thick behind the ice house there. Now, there's no way it'd ever be that thick anymore. They harvested ice up until 1929. That was the last harvest. And I'm not sure why they took that particular time, because they're going into depression. That would have made a major investment. But maybe the ice was, maybe it had open winter and they couldn't cut the ice and they had to ship it in from the north. Or maybe the river is becoming too polluted. I always would tell people, because that Rock River ice was what would you put in your drinks. And if people got something extra, we never charged anything extra for it. And if you got sick, they couldn't trace it back to us because it was long gone. So we were in the clear on that one. But basically, two families owned it since 1858, the Atwood family and the Schultz family. The City Ice Company had other ice houses around town, but they had three main ones right down on Main Street. And they put up about 15,000 ton down there. And then it also would do private contracts with like some of the beer companies, even the blind school. Sure, let's put up their ice for them too. And they had one up at Traxler Park. They built in 1911. And I know when they went to take it down, the guy was taking it down for the wood and he got tired of taking it down, so they just burned it down. So that's how they lost that one up there. And they also had a runaway. That would have to be one of the problems of the horses. run around through the streets of Janesville. But nobody got hurt or anything. But you can imagine the ice wagons going through there. I think we had 5 at City Ice Company throughout the city. And the wagon would pull up to the house, and the Iceman had his apron on, usually. And he had a ice pick in a holder. I didn't bring the ice pick because it's probably a weapon nowadays. You can't use it. But they did talk about the Iceman. They said, well, the Iceman, see, for every man in the world, let's see, for every man, there's a woman, but for the Iceman, he always has his pick. So that was Joe Butt. And then also, he would take the ice up into the house and with it on the shoulder. Then he also accused the Iceman of giving the women the cold shoulder, too. And then, but we were ahead of Elon Musk even, too, because the horse knew where to go. So he had driverless vehicles back there. So the Iceman would go in the house, and the horse would be waiting for him down at the next place. Well, some of the interesting things for me, Dave could testify, is like when the Rock County Fair would come, that would be a special event. And the thing I remember about that is Ernie Farrell was the owner of the thing, and he used to go around and collect all the money, because that's when each individual amusement ride had their own ticket. But he also had a straw hat on, and he also had a weapon underneath his shoulder holster. But the thing I liked about the Rock County Fair, when I was about 10 or 12 years old, I could drop a 50-pound block in this Coca-Cola cooler at the foot-long hot dog stand. I'm telling you, those are the best hot dogs in the world with nice cold ice. You couldn't beat it. Then we had circuses came to town. Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus, 1954, September 7th. You went up the fairgrounds. You had 35,000 people up there in 2 shows. You wouldn't get 500 up there now. Maybe protesting the animals if they still had the animals. But the thing that was unique for us, they cooled a big tent with ice. They took about 4 tons of ice, and they had big fans that cooled the tent. And I also remember they had the sideshows. Come on in for one time, see the tattoo man from the head to the toes, and now you walk down the street and you see the tattoo man. We had fish trucks, live fish trucks, shipping carp from Rock River out to New York City and Nebraska too. And they had a fish car they used to hook onto the Milwaukee Road up at the depot. And they would take about 12 tons of ice, because these were all live fish, because when we went to New York City, the rabbi had to bless them before they could kill them and then sell them, because it was mostly to the Jewish population out there. A couple of interesting things for me. One was I walked in on a holdup down in Beloit once. The guy had the gun on my customer, but I had no idea what was going on. And my customer was arguing with him, and he finally put the gun down in his trench coat and ran right by me and out the door. So we were lucky that time. That was kind of interesting. Another interesting thing was 1982, we just dropped the ice off, or just stopped up in Edgerton on our way to Stoughton, at a little convenience store outside of Edgerton. And the woman's name was Barbara Nelson. And I can remember still to this day. She was laughing and having I don't know, she didn't eat ice any that day. And I don't know what we talked about. And my nephew was with me. And but a half an hour later, somebody abducted her. They found her dead over at in Elkhorn. And they never did find out who killed her. And just last year, detective called me from Madison, wanted to know if I could remember anything, or my nephew, what was going on there. I have to tell you about one other interesting thing. The City Ice Company, one of their employees. Because the question always is about the Iceman and the Milkman. Did they deserve all that notoriety, or the hanky? Did they commit any hanky-panky while making their home deliveries? Well, I'm not sure how much or how great it was, but I do know there was an old commercial from Burma Shave. You remember those commercials along the road, the red and white commercials? Well, one of them said that the Iceman changed his route when the husband started using Burma Shave. Now, also, City Ice Company had an employee named Toby Carr back in the 40s. And Toby Carr was apparently, this individual told me the story, was quite a ladies' man. And one day, Toby Carr is cutting ice in the back of the truck. And an irate husband ran to back him and killed him. He died over in the terrace on Racine Street. And just before he died, because they didn't have ambulances, somebody ran over from the ice house, and he looked up and he said, well, he said he was going to get me, and he got me. So he died there. And his name was Vinnie Vincent, was the culprit. And he was charged with manslaughter. And he went to prison. And I don't know if Toby Carr was, had a lot of affairs or what happened, but I do know that this gentleman told me, he said that when he died, he had the route on the west side of Janesville. There was such a flood of tears from all his customers that it flooded the whole west side. So, I'm not, that's the only thing I can see might have done it. But there is a sequel to the story. Years later, Tiny, his name was Tiny then, he gets out of prison. He comes back and he opens up a restaurant up on Academy and Wall Street. And we get a call that he needs a bag of ice, and I was 16 years old. He needs ice cube. And I knew about the story. So I'm assuming in my mind, he's going to blame every Iceman for what happened to his wife. So I'm like Ichabod Crane, Washington Irving story. Going up there, I'm sweating to go in there. So I drive up there, go in I don't look left or right, and take my money and get out of there. And I was so relieved to get back there. Typical day at the ice house, we'd start in the summertime at 4 o'clock in the morning, 7 days a week, from Memorial Day to Labor Day. And the individuals that worked for us, they never got to spend the money they made, so they had extra money when they got to college because they couldn't run around. So how could, City Ice Company survive all those years when you think about, government regulations, depressions, floods, fires, and it's just by perseverance and adapting. Also, it's by having outstanding employees. And I was very fortunate when I owned the ice company to have an outstanding support system. And one was my wife, Gwen, shared the day. She took care of the books, did anything else, and she had to put up with me not being home a lot. And then when I spent the money on my artifacts and all that stuff for different things. And then Dave Parr worked with me when he undergraduate, graduate. Now he's Dr. Parr. I should mention the name of Dr. Parr, but he kept working for me all those years. I kept drafting me every summer, and he ran the docks, and then my nephews. But I was amazed the individuals that we had that worked for us. They're all smarter than I was, which was good. But and I learned a lot from them, and I think they enjoyed working for us. And one individual came back there about 3 years ago, and he walks in the office and he said, "It looks the same as when I worked there." And he worked there back in the '60s, and he was one of the smartest guys I've ever known. He got his degree at Caltech, then he went to Vietnam and got 5 Bronze Stars in Vietnam, and then he went to Harvard Law School, became a big corporation lawyer out in California. But he was back home. We still have the old ice truck, the 46 Dodge truck. He wanted to get his picture taken by it. So it was nice when all these individuals come back that had worked for us all those years. I'm going to, there's going to be a little video here, and you can get a little idea what it was like back in the old days. And this is a random lake, not too far from here. They had 5 ice houses up there one time, 550 feet long, 150 feet wide. And they put them up there, but they also shipped the lot by the Milwaukee Road into Milwaukee. And Mickey Orth is one that's going to be talking. Just passed away 2 years ago. Marine veteran from World War II. I got to know him because he ran the ice company. I think, Dave, you met him different times. And very knowledgeable individual. Went to Duke University and stayed in the ice business all his life. So, go ahead.
35 and 36, the winter of 35 and 36. And it was taken by Clarence Weber, Sylvia Weber's husband. And although he was an amateur, he did a pretty good job in as much as he took it from the beginning of the operation right through the steps until the ice went up into the hull. He followed the way it went. So it doesn't take very long. So I'm going to kind of explain what's happening in this so you grasp it a little more. The business was started actually, my great-grandfather came from Germany about 1850, something like that. And my great-grandfather and my grandfather went to work for a company in Milwaukee. It was known at that time as Wisconsin Great Lakes. And interestingly enough, that's where I ended up my ice career. I managed with Hometown, which is the predecessor of Wisconsin Great Lakes. So it kind of was a full circle. We had sold our business to them in 1968. So anyway, my great-grandfather and my grandfather worked for Wisconsin Great Lakes for about 3 or 4 years, something like that. And then they went on their own and they harvested ice on the Milwaukee River about where Pfister and Vogel Tannery is, below the North Avenue Dam. And they operated there until the mid-1970s, 1870s, pardon me. And by that time, the Milwaukee River was polluted, you can imagine that, to the extent that they couldn't harvest the ice from it anymore. So they started looking around for property, and they came out to Random Lake, and they bought the land on the south end of the lake from Mr. Noah. And at that time, that was a swamp that they bought. I suppose Mr. Noah was glad to get rid of it. And what they did, they filled it in. They took the land, where my house is down there on the corner. You can see where they actually cleared that off and put all that land into the lake. Then they built their ice house on it. They also had an ice house at Spring Lake, but they couldn't get trains in there. They couldn't put a switch down there for some reason on that curve, and so they hauled all that ice from Spring Lake to Random Lake in wagons, if you can imagine. So this film, when it starts out, you'll see when the ice froze, they would start measuring it. they'd go out and just drill a hole in the ice, and they had a ruler they put down there, and when the ice got to be 7 inches thick, it was able to hold a horse or a team of horses. And then they would start scraping the lake, the snow, because snow is an insulator. They wanted to get that off so that the cold would go down and develop the ice. Also, the snow would create white ice, which was undesirable. When the ice would reach a thickness of 12 inches, it was ready for harvest. And at that time, they would mark the field out. They'd usually cut about 60 acres. And 12 inches of ice, 60 acres, that's about 60,000 tons.
You're supposed to be
And
showing.
that's what they would put up there. It was about 1,000 tons to an acre. First, they'd cut that ice with a field saw in a grid.
I don't know if they were going to there.
When that was accomplished, they would start cutting these.
Yeah.
The floats weighed 60 ton ice. That's I think 60 ton float.
To show them actually cutting
And when
ice
they
out
would
on
do
the field
that,
seat.
they would have to. You'll see guys going along in those cracks. They would caulk the seams because when they would break those loose,
See what the other one
so the
says.
water didn't get in the seams and refreeze the whole thing back together.
Okay.
Then they would float that flow up a channel, and slowly they would cut it into smaller pieces, and eventually there would be just 2 pieces at a time going up into the conveyor into the ice house.
What did you use for caulking?
Snow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
When the field saw would throw up considerable sawdust or ice dust, whatever it was.
I think we're going to change that. The one I wanted to show you is they're actually cutting the ice. And hopefully this other one will do that. He's just talking about some of the history. And I want to show the actual scenes. Oh, liquor, yeah. Okay, there it is.
I mean, they didn't go right to the top, of course. I tried it this morning. It was stuck.
There we go. Now you can see them
them
out there on the horses and stuff.
The way they plowed that. That's high hanging on this.
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
Do you see? You on your way? And they would plow that. This is a field saw that I told you about.
There you see the grooves in there.
That would cut down.
They're not
about
using horses there.
6 inches. First they cut it one way, then they cut it the other way.
In fact, 2 of the guys that were on that saw are still living.
Sure, no.
Eugene Clark.
No, he died.
He did?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's gone.
And the other is a Schmidt, huh?
Herbie Wolf.
Oh, Herbie Wolf, okay.
Wow.
Huh.
The tall one,
Yeah, this is Eugene right there. Herbie on the other side. Yeah. In fact, they're related. This is the finishing saw. They call it a turkey kicker for some reason. But that went completely through. And there are the caulkers that I told you about. See, they were caulking the seams ahead of that thing. So that when they broke that loose, that the water didn't get up in those seams and refreeze. Otherwise, because sometimes when they did this, it would be below zero. You know, they did that also. There's the old high school. You see the hill in back? That was the old high school. There's not much there, even. That's Felly Hago. That's Tom, or Hagel. That's Tom Hagel.
So they're rafting it down the endless chain.
Yeah, that's one of the floors.
That they're standing on?
Yeah.
There's only one guy standing on there.
That's Jack Gessner. Those of you who remember him.
What size, I mean, feet-wise, what size, do you know offhand?
Well, no, I don't.
Okay.
But that was about 60 ton right there. That's my dad on the left, my grandfather on the right. He didn't shave for the
You want to get windburned.
Right. See how they chop those off? And
Oh, yeah.
it was a labor-intensive business. This whole thing was run by a 10-horsepower steam engine, the conveyance system. The rest of it was all manpower.
Did anyone ever fall in while they were doing this?
Oh, yeah, I suppose. And all the time, though, there was only one fellow that drowned. So.
I was gonna ask if anybody drowned.
Yeah.
Local there?
Not even hard.
Yeah, actually, he lived across the lake, and he was going home, and he fell in, and nobody knew he was there. And they just left him in there till spring.
For sure. You did move the Tim Hortons one, I know my father.
Yeah. That was John Huff. That was my father's partner. This is a view from the top. They'd employ about 140 men would do this. And in 1943, when they made the last ice, I think they did it with about 45 men, so you can imagine how hard they had to work. But then they only put up 48,000 tons that year.
With still the same equipment, or are they
With the
modern?
same equipment. That's Al Schultz. He was the foreman. Earl Schultz's father.
Which horses did you use?
They had two of their own, but most of them they would rent. And they'd stay in the barn that was where the pumping station is. They're lowering the gallery. That gallery was suspended by cables. If you look at these pictures on the older ones, this was an improvement over the old. The old gallery was just stationary. But there was no. You think those fellows up there were 40 feet high with just that little railing? You wonder what OSHA would say. There's your grandpa. You see him? They're just starting a new house. That's Sylvia sitting on the ice. You can see how thick that ice is. That's more than 12 inches, but in 1936 it was so cold it got away on them. And you'll see
Well, there comes the train.
yeah, they had to get that rotary plow in and
There's a train with it. Oh, look at
there's Doc Luke with his first snowmobile.
The ending has nothing to do with the ice. They're just showing off their new vehicle.
They were off for some reason this day, and my dad got the fire department to come out so he could take a picture of them.
a lot of snow.
Yeah, that was a bad winter.
Back in those days, that was before the EPA, the OSHA, Clean Water Act. They'd never be
Yeah, a
able
lot
to
of
do
this
some of the
ice
stuff
would
they
cut
did
some of
there.
this off. Now here it shows later, you see the
Employees-
ice was so, it was
I mean,
almost like cubes.
there's no way they'd be able to cut
they
ice
could
like
hardly
that.
control it.
With all the risk involved.
So this then had to be cut down before they...
Oh, yeah, right here they did that.
Okay.
Of course, they shaved them anyway because don't
They're
don't
shaving
forget
off
they
to
had
get the
horses on
white ice, so they got real clear
They
ice.
had seen that. They had to make sure.
Now, what would the federal government say about that?
We used to make lemonade.
My mother.
You used to get a chunk of ice for a dime?
Was it? This is how they cleared Highway 57. There was so much snow. There were clamshell with it.
Snow was packed so tight.
Yeah.
There's 36 now?
This has nothing to do with the ice. This is my father's bowling club, but all the shakers and movers from Random Lake are
They look
here.
like mafia, these guys.
Eddie Becker, he had and Al Altenholzer. George, no, Oh, that's Henry Career, huh?
Yeah. The mafia of random names.
That's your dad, or is that your uncle? That was our baby.
Oh, my uncle.
Yeah.
Bill Turner.
There's Curtis. Yeah, Bill Turner.
That's a little known meeting of the mafia. Fritzy Firestein, yeah.
Where was that dance hall? It wasn't down in Spring Lake.
No, that was taken at Silver, I don't know, someplace up around Elkhart.
Oh.
This is our house today. They all stayed there. That was all the foreman, and that was kind of their office. But they lived in style. They had their own cook. There he is.
My mom was a cook.
Who is that? Schmidt. I just can't. Just his first name is. This is Ed Fuss. Eddie Schmidt. Yeah. Yeah, there's Eddie Schmidt.
On different properties.
Or wherever.
Oil tanks in the background. Great fashion.
Yeah. Good one.
Yeah.
That's when they had steam engines. I hate to see the railroad go. I don't know anybody else.
Yeah.
I'll miss it.
That's the lifeline.
Carry my grandpa.
That's your grandpa too, with his mule. There's another portion on here. It's going to take a few seconds for it to roll. That was taken by Wilbur Schultz in 1941, and it's kind of interesting. This is when they dedicated the Sheboygan Marsh, because Wilbur Schultz was on the Sheboygan County Board. Yeah.
Had to put the railroad in there for the Nelson boys. I forgot to show you, this is the last ice bag we had. We went to plastic bags at the end. But before that, we had paper bags. And before that, we used to deliver ice cubes to the taverns with either wooden buckets or canvas bags. And then we used them over and over again. And I also forgot about the scale that hung in the back of the ice wagon, because the iceman would take an axe and cut a block of ice, and then he'd weigh it before he'd take it up into the house. And there's a story that they all said that the iceman weighs 200 pounds in the front of the wagon. What does he weigh in the back of the wagon? Well, he weighs ice, obviously. So, and then of course the window card. You used to put in windows downtown. So when the iceman was coming down the street, you know how much ice they wanted. If they had it up like this, they wanted 75 pounds. If they wanted, it was 50 pounds. So I brought a few pictures along so you can see what it was like back in the old days and a few artifacts. And if anybody's ever interested, sometimes they can come down, stop at the ice house if the flag is out, or call me, and I can show you all the artifacts that I've collected over the years, all the horse-drawn implements they used out in the lakes and the rivers, horse-drawn ice wagons. I think I got 5 real horse-drawn wagons. Some of our old trucks are down there, books, magazines, anything to do with the ice industry. So anybody's welcome, come down and see all that stuff. So you never know who's going to show up down there from one day to the other. So some people, if you like history, you'll find it very interesting. So a lot of stories. So I'll take any questions.
Can you talk about preserving the ice over the winter or over the summer?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, that's, I forgot it. Yeah, they used to pack it in sawdust because it's a non-conductor of heat, and then they had ventilation up on top because you wanted to get the moisture out of there, and it would last 2 to 3 years in an ice house without refrigeration.
How much would they put on? How much sawdust? How thick?
I'm not sure. I'd say about an inch thick on each layer. Yeah.
Did they have to shave it then after they took it out of the sawdust?
They tried to clean it off before they took it into people's houses. But sometimes some wagons had a bucket with water and stuff, so they could rinse it off too. And that was one of the things when manufacturing ice came out, that it would be clean. You didn't have to worry about that. And then, around 1900, I know in Chicago, there were outbreaks of typhoid, and it probably came from contaminated ice. Because ice, freezing will not kill the germs, bacteria. So you can pick up a lot of stuff that way.
How long, were you guys still delivering to homes when your family bought the company?
Yep.
So how late, so these people actually had ice boxes? And do you know when that really phased out?
Well, the last ice box in the city of Janesville was 1972. Miss Stenlin up on 702 Logan. She was the last one that had them. But there were a lot of ice boxes in the 40s, early 50s yet.
How long did the ice last in those? Did they have to get it resupplied like my grandma's house in the 40s, they had it down in a dirt basement, and they had a refrigerator down there. How often would they have to get that?
Ice?
Yeah.
About 2 or 3 days, depending on the weather.
Really? That's
Yep.
all it would last?
Yep. Yep.
Wow.
I was just gonna say, I was doing research for another project and, back in the late 1800s, so I found tons of articles about the ice harvest in Janesville.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the
I'd like to
horses
see
going
'em.
through. Yeah, I didn't print them, but I wanna go back and redo that. It was the microfiche film on the Gazette.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the horses going through.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was unbelievable.
Yeah, I'd be glad to get all that
Yeah,
stuff.
okay.
Yeah. Dave, what do you got? You can add because you were there all those years.
Yeah, all those years, 23, no, I think you did a great job.
Yeah. Well, you got some interesting stories done, interesting times.
None of them I could tell in public.
Yeah. But we talk about, you're in the truck for these people a lot of times. Sometimes we're talking about poetry with Eric. He was big on Emily Dickinson. And now I think he's got 5 master's degrees and he's teaching at Northwestern. That's the kind of caliber of the kids that work there. And then Dave, we talk about investments. I think you made enough money to get down payment on your house through investing on some stock tips that we got from some of our customers. So it was an interesting time. It was difficult. It was 10 years yesterday that we sold it. It was difficult to leave the ice business. It had been part of my life all that time. So when we turned off the compressor and drained out the ammonia, we still kept the lights on because I still go down there all the time, and that's why I kept the place to go. So a lot of history. And my nephews, they grew up with it and worked with me all the time too. So, well, you had 11 questions, you said.
Can you talk
Oh.
about injuries?
Pardon?
Can you talk about injuries? Like an example, because everything they used was sharp.
Right. Right.
And walking on slippery stuff.
Well, we're fortunate. We never had any later on when I was there. What I'm sure they did. I know people drowned in ice harvesting. And then, of course, you got the ice pick. One thing about the ice pick, they were excellent tools to stab tires and stuff. If you want. But one of my customers was telling me about his aunt. She got in a domestic quarrel with her boyfriend, and she stuck him with an ice pick. Well, he would have lived, but they pulled the ice pick out, and he bled to death. But because they're really sharp, those points, those ice picks. Yeah, there were a lot of.
Did they lose horses too?
Yes, they did. They tried to save them. They put a rope around their neck, their chokehold, to pull them back up, but sometimes they just didn't get there. But they had cleats on them. The horses had cleats on their feet so they could walk on the ice, and the men did too. Otherwise, it'd be too slippery for them. Yep.
When did the ammonia machines come in?
Well, I'd say right around after the First World War. They had steam power before that. We had ammonia at the ice cells. The thing about ammonia refrigeration, if you got a leak, you got a leak because you can smell it. You have to get out of there. So.
Did you know much about the Atwoods? Obviously, there's Atwood Ave in Janesville, where they're a prominent family.
They're very prominent.
And they started it right down there by Traxler Park.
Their family did.
Yes.
Star Atwood was the last one that I knew. He had it at the end. Yes, he was on the city council. They were big on economic development. Well, the Iceman, back in those days, I mean, he was a big man in town. He employed a lot of people, and a lot of them were very wealthy because everybody needed ice to survive. Peg.
Would that Atwood family have been a greater regional family? Because there's an Atwood Park in Rockford.
Well, that I don't know. Mm-mm. Any other questions? I think a lot of you, well, Mark and Mike have been there. Yvonne's been down there. Yvonne, she grew up with ice in her mouth too, up in Sparta. Yeah. So they had a rich history of the ice industry. So if anybody wants to see all that stuff, I'm happy to show them all that stuff down there. So sometimes it's interesting. So.